welcome to this Nayanta conversation. We're delighted today to have a chance to have this conversation with Nadir Godrej. Nadir is not only one of our leading industrialists. Everyone knows the Godrej name and knows Nadir personally. But as you'll see later on, brings a really interesting combination, not just of capabilities and interests, but deep skills and understanding that's quite unique to play. So we're delighted to have this conversation with Nadir. A second attribute is that Nadir is also, together with Satish and others, a part of the Nayanta founding team. And so Nadir, we're really delighted to have you with us today. Nadir, you know, Nayanta has designed its curriculum so that every student who goes through Nayanta has a solid understanding of both what we call cultural and technical literacy. We're still defining that in very precise terms and translating how that shows up in courses and an overall area of study. But to me, in my head, no one better illustrates that combination of cultural and technical literacy than you. Because you have a bachelor's and master's in chemical engineering from MIT and Stanford. Then, not to be outdone, you also went and did your MBA at Harvard. So you have MIT, Stanford, and Harvard as your universities. You then combine your background in a technical field with deep understanding of any technical issue. I mean, when we've had discussions on technology to take a particular area of interest, biomass boilers, you would ask me questions which would send me back to the team in terms of finding out more so that I could answer your questions. And any technical subject you would always want to really demonstrate mastery of and really get to an understanding of what its essence is. But you're not just a technologist. You are also really comfortable with cultural areas. You not only love poetry, but you write poetry. You speak fluent French. You even write poetry in French. I mean, I know no other deep technologist who writes poetry in French except for some vague French intellectuals. You know, so it's really a distinctive attribute. And maybe the best way to start this conversation is by asking you, so where did this come from?
Yeah, it's very good that Nayanta wants to give people a broad education. And somebody once said that science teaches you how to do things and the humanities teach you what to do. So I think it's very important to have both of them. And I'll recite a poem which describes how I reached this stage. My father partnered me in life. In times of joy and times of strife, he taught me from my earliest days to learn in most unusual ways. A learned man he always was, and I say this not just because he proudly claimed a PhD. There was much more, as you will see. Strange relations he could spot by linking each and every dot. In science he was a real king, but his bat he'd readily swing at many subjects under the sun in ways that were so much fun. History, geography, linguistics, and free market economics were subjects that he would relish. And all of these he would embellish with anecdotes that linked them well. And at an early age I could tell that linking subjects helps you learn. Today I know it helps you earn. The years he spent in Germany were a lasting legacy. And even native speakers found his German was very sound. And Austria then asked him to be their nation's honorary CG. One thing I found very nice, Papa was always most precise. We all recall that common sight, his Mercedes with the reading light, the trip he took around the site, ensuring everything was right. He always fought dirt and grime, came on time and left on time, enjoyed his work, enjoyed his play, watched that movie, saw this play, and classical music warmed his heart. Before dinner, the gramophone would start. And about my mother and grandmother. 100 years ago today, I wrote this at my mother's centenary a few years ago. 100 years ago today, my mother started out on her way. But to understand her life as mother, teacher, perfect wife, her parents are the starting gate, the major part of her fate. My granny, Mama, was named Shireen, was always calm and never mean. Her name in Persian just meant sweet, quite apt for such a dulcet treat. A British teacher in her school, who sized her well, she was no fool, quite clearly tweaked the spelling, and to Serene, and there's no telling if character led to the name or vice versa. All the same, Serene indeed was stately, calm, for weary souls a soothing balm, a freedom fighter for the nation, and poet for the cause of liberation. With great verve she would recite. I still recall that glorious sight. A love of literature was kindled there, a love that mother would also share. She also sometimes took to verse for greeting cards that were terse. But then the art that brought her glory was a different medium, the short story. In all her subjects, Serene was bright, except for maths, which was her plight. Professors then were mostly Brits. A stereotype sometimes fits. The only Indian was the professor of mathematics, don't you scoff. In every subject, Serene did well, except for maths, where her grades fell. Professor Dastur's pride was hurt. He had to give Serene a spurt. He soon went on a remedial mission and called her in for home tuition. His dapper nephew was on the scene and quick to notice young Serene. His proposal quickly carried, and very soon they were married. Now, Holmes was a medico, trained in Ireland, quite the pro. He started with the Tata Mills, and thanks to his approach and skills, he proved to be a pioneer. The nascent field that he would steer was industrial medicine, to which he gave a holistic spin. This doctor with the healing touch always relied just as much on prevention as on cure, a strategy that's always sure, and in those days all the more. With holidays on hills or shore, healthy living was his mission, starting first with good nutrition. In that house, the only way to start a meal was crudité. A cow at home provided milk, fresh and healthy, smooth as silk. His bathing water was very cold, even when he got quite old. Serene enjoyed her days in school, while Holmes never found that cool. He much preferred being free of unreasonable authority. On the first day of vacation, off to the beach or hill station. And so my mother had a share of happy, loving, healing care. Her father taught her to be free and always question authority. But from her mother, she had a yearning for literature and constant learning. All khadi-clad, they could see the virtues of simplicity. Satyagraha was in the air, and Granny sought to do her share. She criticized the colonial curse with her patriotic verse, but not content to merely write, she took on the Swadeshi fight. Wherever foreign goods were spotted, the ladies asked they be boycotted. This was a noble sacrifice, but there was a heavy price. The family was unattended. How on earth could this be mended? Jai was the eldest of the lot. Her brothers very quickly got a very capable second mother, and all of them helped one another. Of both home and studies she took care and did it all with the greatest flair. Could she have then learned multitasking? Alas, I never thought of asking. Now looking back, I clearly see she was a master of efficiency. Recycling one could always see, as well as 5S and GMP. I also think she learned the towering power one wields by empowering. The theme played out at home and school. Indeed, a very powerful tool. Her discipline was very light. You might well say out of sight. For a child to grow and live, reinforcement must be positive. Then a child will safely cruise, free of any hurt or bruise. Her childhood had a lot to do with the life she would pursue. Managing her younger brothers made her feel she could teach others. And so she did BA, B.Ed. Didn't start with kids, but instead she did a stint of teacher training. I still recall her explaining that all the students, everyone, indeed was older barring none. She was convinced that education is partnership and participation. It should be egalitarian and not at all authoritarian. And she knew how well to train, no matter what the domain. Papa knew well his geography, but Mummy didn't really see the purpose of just knowing facts. Those could be found in tomes or tracts. Without knowing the Aral Sea, how could she teach geography? She would respond, she needn't know the facts by heart for knowledge to flow. It happens that a girl is told her pretty head shouldn't hold elaborate thoughts beyond her ken, perhaps a conspiracy of men. At Gamadia School, my mother taught English Lit, a class well sought by all the students in the school. But mother played it by the rule. When called in as the substitute, the joyous girls, quite astute, yelled, "Poetry! Poetry!" A subject they loved, you see. But the period had been designated for maths. And so she elucidated an abstruse theorem lucidly. A math-dreading girl could quickly see the logical explanation. For her, it was a revelation. A subject that used to make her tense suddenly seemed to make some sense. So, there's reason in math, she gasped, an insight belatedly grasped. Mum collected dropped needles and pins and treated these finds as little wins. Was this just a clean-up mission or a strange superstition? Not that she ever gave a sign that she thought superstition fine, but she says that she kept score, and one day she picked up 24. And on that day, she saw an ad from Godrej, and she met my dad. And marriage, I think, was quite a change. The Dastur house was a free range. For a person educated and trained, this new life was somewhat constrained. For postgraduate school, she had been set. Alas, that dream was never met. But yet, she rarely showed regret, for she was not the kind to fret. She plunged right into a new life of teacher, mother, and loving wife. My childhood now, I should mention, was filled with care and attention. Quite early on, she could succeed in teaching me to love to read. She taught me bridge. She taught me chess. The most intriguing, I would guess, was how the chess lessons went, as very little time was spent on detailed instructions. In fact, her technique was full of tact. The practice games were very fair. With a handicap, she took care that I was motivated and keen. The first handicap was her queen. Then rook and bishop were removed. Quite steadily, I then improved. She always gamely played her best. On my own steam, I passed each test. And when all was said and done, without a handicap, I won. And she was most pleased by my win. Not the slightest sign of chagrin. What seemed to me like her defeat, in her eyes was a teacher's treat. My mother grew up by the sea, and that is where she loved to be. Wherever salty air was found, and waves would make a sloshing sound, with the sea breeze caressing balm, she would feel at peace and calm. Each Thursday afternoon we'd reach the very peaceful Juhu beach. At first we'd swim in the sea, while usually it was us three, just Papa, Mummy and me, with a cousin or friend occasionally. And once we returned to land, we would then walk on the sand, and I would sometimes chase a crab. The slower ones I could grab. I'd carry it for a little while, then let it go with a smile. From these stories you can see all the thoughts that influence me. Geography, history, economics, math, science, and linguistics. Weaving them together seamlessly and expressing it in poetry. Walk and swim for your health. Don't be enamored with your wealth. For leadership, the real trick is loving support without the stick. Thank you.
Over the years, Nadir, I've probably heard you read out maybe 20 poems in different forums. And there was, I think, one of the first was on innovation. I remember one on climate change. I remember one that you wrote for, I think, the inauguration of an R&D center in Godrej. I remember one on economic policy in India, on liberalization. I remember one on family business, which you did obviously at a family business conference. I mean, these are really hugely different topics, and each one was wonderful. These two I had not heard, and I think they're just wonderful. How did you start? I mean, because did you start writing poetry for speeches, or do you write poetry to think, or do you write poetry to communicate, or?
I started writing poetry a little bit in school, a little bit while I was at MIT also, and then in the 80s, once or twice, if I found a conversation was difficult, I would write a poem and send it to the person. The speeches started later. The first speech was quite odd, because at that time I was studying Russian. And my Russian...
Why were you studying Russian?
My excuse was, the real reason was that I love learning languages. My excuse was that we were doing a lot of barter trade with the Soviet Union. And I was planning a trip to Russia at some time, and I thought it would be a good idea to learn Russian. And I did go on one trip to Russia after I learned Russian, and then the Soviet Union collapsed. And that was the only time I used my Russian. So anyway, my teacher, Lyudmila Sergeyevna, once said that she wanted to celebrate the anniversary of Pushkin, and she was calling Nissim Ezekiel to be the chief guest. He was a leading Indian poet, and that's how I got to know him. And funnily enough, yesterday, there was an event to celebrate his centenary, reciting of his poems. I couldn't make it to that, but it's interesting that he's 100 years old this year. And so it was an anniversary of Pushkin, and I just happened to read an article in Span magazine, that was a magazine of the US Embassy, about how Vikram Seth wrote Golden Gate.
Sure.
Now, Golden Gate is written in Pushkin sonnets. And in that article, he mentions he had read two translations of Evgeny Onegin, Eugene Onegin. And one was by Nabokov, very scholarly, in blank verse. And the other was by Charles Johnston in Pushkin sonnets. And so I said, this is appropriate for a Pushkin anniversary. So I wrote a speech in Pushkin sonnets. I'll just read a little bit of it. Had I not written one short letter in which I mentioned Vikram Seth, perhaps it would have been much better for those of you with little faith in my admittedly poor talent. But some amongst you who are gallant and choose to lend at least 1 year, in cadence verse you shall all hear how Russia's scion Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin wrote in verse, tetrameter, supple terse, now flows then ebbs, there's nothing grander about his great protagonist, Eugene Onegin Amorist. And the speech went on and described the connection between Vikram Seth and
that was the first. That was
my first speech. And then, but that didn't result in me always deciding to write speeches. That happened a little bit later when I went to Calcutta, which is a very literary city. And it was for the Harvard Business School Economic Times Awards. At that time it was called that.
A highly poetic event, yes.
It later became the Economic Times Award when the Harvard Business School withdrew. And I was an alum, so I was one of the organizing committee, and they asked me to give a vote of thanks. And I always thought a vote of thanks...
They're usually terrible things. They're just such a waste of time. Right?
So this is what I wrote. A vote of thanks, that thankless task. I don't know why they always ask. Some silly fool on the stage, while all of you just see them rage. I do not wish to be a bore, so very soon I'll end this chore and let you go for food and booze, but while still here, feel free to snooze. I should devote the next few rhymes in praise of economic times and so on. And then I said, this seems to work. I do it always.
So, and very often, by the way, Nadir will, he'll write the poem on the flight to wherever you're going?
No, usually a little bit before.
That.
Yes, sometimes the day before.
Yeah. So that's wonderful. You know, we were just talking yesterday, Ranjan and I, about the importance of teaching the right attitude to students, and you captured that just perfectly. I think we're going to use, we'll use that
Yes.
couplet from your poem, because as part of the Nayanta ethos on education, you know, it's...
and that was my mother.
Yeah.
I used to go into a class sometimes,
Yeah.
and it was full of noise. Children were running all over the class. She would give them an assignment at the beginning of the class, and she didn't care how they did it. They could collaborate, they could do it individually, they could ask other people questions, or they could come and ask her a question, but they were on their own.
Yeah, sounds like a good model. Great, thanks. So, you know, one of your passions is R&D, and it's something we share. We've spoken a lot about it. We've talked about R&D. You've participated in many of our discussions on R&D as well. The Godrej Agrovet Research Center is named after you, very, very appropriately.
And recently the oleochemicals one also.
And the oleochemicals one also, very good. Yeah. And you know, I wonder, what are your views on, what are our priorities? What should our priorities be in Indian industry? We've had sessions on R&D in this program.
Yes.
We had one in Bangalore. We had some discussion on this yesterday, again today. So what's your view on what Indian industry's priorities should be for R&D, and from a policy perspective as well?
Yeah. No, R&D is very, very important. Of course, Naushad is the expert on R&D, and he's written a book about it. And we're not doing enough R&D in Indian companies. We are fortunate that my father started an R&D center even before I joined the business.
Let's say something about that, because I think, you know, everyone in the Godrej group knows,
yes,
but I don't think how fundamental the innovation was is appreciated actually in India, and it was very early on.
Yes. And he did his PhD in making soap directly from fatty acids.
Yeah.
Otherwise, soap was made from fats, and that's a complex process. And whereas when you make it from fatty acids, it's a perfect science. You can neutralize it perfectly, etc. And an added bonus was he started India's oleochemical industry, starting fatty acids, and then later on we moved on to fatty alcohol. And to do all these things, we needed an R&D center. And then we did a lot of research when, in the beginning, we used to make soaps out of vegetable oils. Then the STC started importing tallow. Then the STC suddenly stopped importing tallow. So we had to use
the STC
minor
was the
oils.
State Trading Corporation. It was a government entity that controlled certain
Yes.
imports. Yeah.
And then we had to start using minor oils because we're not allowed to use edible oils. And the minor oils have a lot of smelly substances in them. So my father developed a process to take them out, basically by splitting the minor oil, taking the oil and deodorizing it. If you distill it, all the odorous compounds come out. And then after you split the oil, you get a very clean fatty acid. But an added bonus was that those chemicals, that the waste products actually proved to be very good agrochemicals. So we entered the agrochemical business as a result of that. So there was an added benefit, and that's a very good learning I've always had. And we do a lot of our R&D on waste products. There's no such thing as a waste product. And if you utilize every waste product, two benefits: you save money and you avoid pollution. So don't throw anything away. That was a lesson that all frugal Indians also, my mother also learned that lesson long ago. She never threw anything away at home, and we didn't throw anything away in our factories.
What about from a policy perspective for R&D? You know, what do you think? You know, we have, for example, you know, you've heard this from me as a sort of dragging gramophone record, that, you know, that we spend on public research, but we do it in these autonomous institutes. but not in the higher education sector to a large extent. And I know that Godrej have worked with both educational institutes and with the national labs. And what has your experience been with?
We worked both with ICT, which is a close neighbor, and my father used to advise doctoral students at ICT. And we've also worked with the National Chemical Laboratory very successfully. We also find that often they come to us with something and their basic research is good, but they know very little about application and they're very slow because it's not a professor's top priority. The researchers in the government labs are a little bit better, but one should always collaborate with them, and there's a lot you can do together. And obviously the development work and finalizing it and the production methods, we are much better at. I'm sure Satish has a lot of experience. He probably works with everyone. Pharmaceuticals is a field in which a lot of research happens. And I remember that when we had 133% write-off, it was a strong incentive for R&D. When we had 70% income tax, we actually made money by investing in R&D. Because 70% of 133% is a little more than 100%. So later on, of course, the income tax came down, the incentive was not so strong. But once you start doing it, you keep continuing it. So it helps to spur people on. And the benefits of R&D are tremendous.
You know, that was our experience too. You know, when the 200% weighted deduction came in for R&D in general, we actually calculated in the company what it was worth to us, the extra benefit. And we said that this is the total amount that we will spend on hiring more R&D engineers, right? So we set out to increase the R&D team by 1/3 because of that 200% weighted deduction. It took us 2 years instead of 1 year to increase the team by the time we'd recruited all the engineers. And we ended up recruiting not 33% more engineers, but 50% more engineers by the time we finished it. But then, you know, that extra group of engineers, the larger R&D, has sustained right through now. I mean, you know, that we haven't in any way cut it back when the weighted deduction went away, because you start seeing the fruit of the output, the benefits. So I do agree. I think it can spur effort, and we're probably ripe for another dose like that in terms of
just
for industry generally.
As you said, it's not necessary. We should do it on our own. But anything that helps us start will help us continue. And a lot of our work has been more development than research, but I think we now need to do more and more fundamental research. It's time India did that. I suppose people are, in the earlier session we had a little bit of discussion. The IPR rights are not fully protected in India, so sometimes people worry about doing fundamental research. Maybe we need to address such issues. If IPR can be easily copied or forced to be licensed out, it may make it difficult.
I think our IPR protection is actually pretty good.
It's pretty good, you think?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, you know, I mean, at least our experience has been that when we've had violations, and we've been able to pursue those, and
I don't see,
and it's enough. More than anything else, it's enough. You know, we haven't actually had to pursue it right through the court.
Right.
Usually, it's enough of a deterrent when you go to the company and say, "Hey, listen, you know, you violated X, Y, Z, and you need to stop, or we will go to court." You know, and it's
then all the more reason we should do more fundamental research.
Yeah, very much. Okay. So I have a couple more questions, and then we'll open it up. You know, we've talked about poetry. We talked a little bit about chemical engineering, and you know, one of my dreams is that at some point in time you will teach a course at Nayanta on the connections between poetry and chemistry, because I'm not sure anyone has explored it. I think someone has. There was a maths professor at Stanford named Bob Osserman, who wrote a book on the poetry in mathematics. and poetry and mathematics, and the combination of poetry and mathematics, and how he argued that it used the same part of the brain or something like that. But I've never seen anything on poetry and chemistry. I don't know if have you thought about it? I mean, it's
not very deeply, but I do believe in using all aspects of the mind on anything you do. And besides all my diverse interests in various subjects, I also have a very diverse interest in the sciences. And chemistry is called the central science.
Yeah.
Because without quantum mechanics, you can't understand the basics of chemistry. And without chemistry, you can't understand biology. And I'm very grateful that when I was at MIT, Professor Powers once told me to read Double Helix. And I took courses in biochemistry. I'm very grateful I did that. We now use biology in our chemical businesses. And we use biology, of course, in Godrej Agrovet, in the animal feed business. Making animal feed, I became an amateur human nutritionist as well, which has kept me healthy. So it's good to have all these broad knowledges, broad interests. And chemistry you can apply in all sorts of things. There was this book recently, a big hit, Lessons in Chemistry, where this lady chemist was harassed and thrown out and couldn't do her research career, but she became a big hit on TV teaching the chemistry of cooking. So,
and she was probably neither a great chef nor a great chemist, but she was good at the combination.
Yes, absolutely. And there's chemistry in everything. And chemistry links all the sciences and can help you link all the other subjects as well.
And actually, I have to say that, I mean, I haven't done anything serious with chemistry since I was in college. Out of choice, I have to say. But there was something intrinsically satisfying when you worked out chemical equations and you got them to balance.
Right.
I mean, there was something very satisfying about getting it to all come out right, and especially when you got it to come out wrong, and then you kept working at it until you got it to come out right. And all the valences balanced and so on.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And I have written poems about chemistry, including sustainability, including my life journey. And in one of those poems, I mentioned that the only famous person I found out who shared a birthday with me was very appropriate. A, because he was a Frenchman, and B, because he was the father of chemistry, Antoine Laurent Lavoisier.
Lavoisier, okay.
And he created chemistry by just measuring things.
Yeah.
In my poem, I said, the man who measured air.
Right. Fine. So I have one last question, and then we have a reading question, which we ask everyone, and then we'll open it up to questions from everyone. So what's the perfect holiday for you?
The three kinds of perfect holidays. My absolute favorite would be an island, and especially if I can swim from one island to the next. And the next best is a mountain, especially if it's a mountain lake. So they can be chilly. I once swam in Lake Tahoe, and although it was summer,
it's pretty cool to freeze it. Well, it is freezing.
And then I had a hot shower for half an hour. Probably dangerous to go in the cold and then go into the heat. And the hot water felt like ice. The third is a game park, where you can watch mammals, watch birds. And recently I was in Javai, which was a leopard sanctuary, but it had a double whammy. You had these live leopards, and then you had these amazing rock formations. And I saw a rock lion eating a leopard. And a dinosaur, and a crocodile, and all sorts of rock formations. So these are my 3 favorite holidays.
So they are all related to nature,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
They're not cities.
Yes, though I should say that I enjoy being in any French city.
Why French city? So you can speak French? Or?
because of my long connection with France. And when I got the Légion d'honneur, I wrote a poem where I started off with my connection to French. And Paris is one of my favorite cities, but small French towns as well. This love for French and for France was a coup de foudre from first glance. My very first link, I now guess, was an early visit by GS. My mother wrote that when I was just 2, ma cousine Genevoise conversed with me en français and left an impression till this day. Perhaps that is the reason why in school I would always try so very hard when it came to French, but Hindi felt like a wrench. In 70, by happenstance, GS invited me to France. So I was quickly on a plane, and then I took a rumbling train. The train was slow, no TGV, but soon I was in Saint-Tropez. The beauties there gave me a scare, for most of them were rather bare. And very soon I came to know why this small town was called Saint-Tropez. For those of you who don't know French, Saint-Tropez or Saint-Tropez is the abbreviation of Saint-Tropez, but it also means big breasts. Of course, I met a comely wench who taught me how to speak in French. At school, you mostly read and write, so speaking French was a delight. And thus began my link to France and my role in IFTA and Alliance. Uncle Sora paved the way. I sorely miss him on this day. Now, there are many reasons why I love the French, but one of them is that on this day they saved my life. Because this day was 26/11/2008, and I'd got a previous French award at the Taj Mahal Hotel. And if it had been up to me, I might have organized the event there. But the Alliance Française had organized a cordon bleu course and a cordon bleu dinner, so we decided to have it there, and the venue for all of that was the newly opened Four Seasons. And I had invitations to go to the Oberoi that night also, and all that was saved, and me, my family, and friends were at the Four Seasons.
I think, Nadir, first of all, thank you very much for coming to Ahmedabad for this conversation and for our meeting later on. As always, it's been wonderful to have you here. It's been wonderful to hear more of your poems. That's always a real treat. And it's just, I think you, as I said right at the beginning, you stand for that cultural, technical literacy combination in such a powerful way. And I think your comments today really illustrated that as well. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Naushad.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.